All right. So last week we went through 2 centuries of Roman history very, very quickly. So don't know if you remember it all, but we will actually pick up basically where we left off, and I think that's the easiest way to do this, just because of the unifying effect of what's coming next. So we have this. I want to, like, usually people are very vain and they say this beautiful picture because you usually draw it yourself, but I know this isn't terribly accurate. So this misshapen view of Europe, North Africa, as well as the Far East there. Or sorry, the Near East, I mean. So this is basically the Roman Empire. You have the dividing lines of basically their territory. That's mostly what they have. And over the centuries, they gain more and more pieces. So this would be more or less what they would have had in the 2nd century AD, more or less. So with the 2nd century AD, we also have one of the most peaceful and prosperous times of the Roman Empire. And I will say Roman Empire rather than say the Roman Republic or the Roman Kingdom, because there's 3 distinct periods of Roman history. We're just focusing on the empire. But you had the 5 good emperors, and this is more or less the accepted term. And the 5 good emperors, which would be Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, Marcus Aurelius. Of course, it wasn't always the best time for Christians because there's persecutions under Trajan, not so much under Hadrian, but definitely Antoninus Pius. That's when Polycarp died. And then there's also under Marcus Aurelius, there was persecutions because, well, he was more concerned about fighting the Germans at that point, and he didn't really care what happened to the Christians. Because Marcus Aurelius was famous for being a Stoic, and he thought that the Christians were not moral enough. Now, of course, Roman citizens would be far more amoral or immoral compared to the Stoics, but Marcus Aurelius was bothered about Christians. He's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Anyways, so you have some persecutions there. And after the 5 good emperors, you have a really cruddy one, Commodus, who was Marcus Aurelius' son. And you had gone by this point, so I don't know. Did you watch the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe?
No.
Okay, no, I guess nobody has. It was on all the time on television when I was growing up. And people kept showing it again and again, assuming that it was actual Roman history. It barely portrayed it well. Anyways, during so in that movie, it actually starts out with Russell Crowe's character serving under Marcus Aurelius, fighting the Germans, and then in the movie, anyways, it's portraying Commodus as murdering Marcus Aurelius. We don't know if that actually happened. There's some suspicions, but we don't know. And Commodus rules, takes over Rome. Nobody likes him, and that part's true. But then it kind of portrays Russell Crowe's character killing him in the Colosseum, which is definitely not true. Commodus actually reigned for better part of 16 years. But finally, assassins got him, and he died. Now, the issue with this, though, and this is basically going to be an issue for everybody, is there was no clear line of succession following Commodus. Because, well, once you kill off the emperor and try to remove his family from power, who do you really have anymore? So now we just have a whole bunch of self-proclaimed emperors. And this is going to enter into the year of, or what's called the year of 5 emperors. So there was the year of 4 emperors, which was 69 AD. And now we're going into the year of 5 emperors with, oh, sorry. Commodus did not reign to 96. I'm getting him confused with somebody else. He reigned to 92. 92. So he reigned for 12 years and some change. So in in 192, he dies, and he dies right at the end of 192. So December 31st, 192, that's when he dies. So the next guy starts up January 1st. So we're in the year 193. So you have a fellow named Pertinax reigning. And he reigns for almost 3 months.
Oh, wow. That's almost elected.
Yeah. Before he's assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard are supposed to be the guys who guard the emperor. But that's also ironic considering most of the emperor, well, about half the emperors end their reigns by being murdered by the Praetorian Guard. So the Praetorian Guard has, historically throughout the empire, been the ones who kind of decided who the emperor gets to be in some way, shape, or form. Because if they don't like the guy who's commanding them, they get rid of him. So that happened all the way back with Caligula, the third Roman emperor, in 41 AD, and then the Praetorian Guard basically choose Claudius as the emperor at that time. And Claudius reigned for quite some time. But generally, yeah, the Praetorian Guard is a mixed blessing because the emperor not only has to protect himself from everybody else with the Praetorian Guard, he also has to protect himself from the Praetorian Guard. Anyway, so Pertinax gets killed by them. And you have Didius Julianus, who takes control in Rome anyways. And he actually has Senate approval. And this is why he's kind of recognized as an actual emperor in line of succession. So he's also 193. Oh, sorry, he didn't have the order. I keep getting this mixed up. No, Didius Julianus did not have Senate approval. He had the approval from Praetorian Guard. That's what I meant. The guy who had Senate approval was Septimius Severus. Septimius Severus. He was from 193 to 211.
Oh, wow.
So he had Senate approval, and he basically asked the Senate, will you back me being emperor? And they said yes. So then he killed Didius Julianus. Now I only have 3 up here, and that's because these were the only ones who were basically effectively recognized in large supply. There are actually 2 more that were recognized only by the armies in their immediate vicinity, and basically you had to kill those guys off before you could be secure. So yes, following the death of Commodus, we actually enter into one of the most unstable times in all of Roman history. For about the next century, you're only going to have 2 emperors who reign longer than 10 years. The average length of reign, I think, is about 6 months. Actually getting close to that. It's only about a year or 2. Because there's like emperors who reign for a couple months, and then they get killed. There's ones that reign for a year and a little bit, and then they get killed. There's ones that reign for 2 years, and then they get killed. And that's the way it goes for quite some time. Basically, the entire century, the entire 3rd century of the Roman Empire. Septimius Severus is actually one of the few who actually brings some stability, and that's why he's reigning so long. So he had control of this province over here, and he had control of that province going back quite a few years, and he was able to convince the Senate that he would be the best man for the job. And in some sense he was, because he actually did bring stability for quite some time. However, partway through his reign, what he decided to do was he decided to focus the religions on a particular god. Now, he was not opposed to having many religions throughout the empire, because, well, this is a polytheistic society. They're fine with having tons of gods everywhere. But Septimius Severus thought, well, this is the god for me. I want people worshiping this one primarily. And this false god is known as Sol Invictus.
Oh,
Any guesses what that means?
invincible son.
Yeah, the invincible sun. So basically, it's a sun god, and well, it basically came into vogue well a little bit earlier than that. But Septimius Severus, he really wanted to promote this particular god, and again, yeah. So Sol Invictus is very much a Latin name, so it only was in vogue really with the Roman Empire, and nobody really worshipped it beforehand. But if you really want to say like worship Apollo and you go, oh, he's pretty much the same as Sol Invictus, yeah, sure, you wouldn't necessarily have an issue. But Sol Invictus is the one that people grab onto. And this is going to have some major implications for the Christians of the empire. Because essentially what Septimius Severus's legislation is, it's you can worship your own gods, but you must, absolute must, worship Sol Invictus and have him first and foremost in your religious practices.
Yeah,
And he wanted to do this for about a year, at least a year. But who knows how long he could have actually carried this. Anyways, so as you can imagine, this is not good for the monotheistic religions known as Judaism and Christianity, because we don't worship other gods. So, following this, we actually get into a massive wave of persecution throughout the empire of Jews and Christians. And that won't always be the case for Jews, because they're not always the ones persecuted, because sometimes during the history of the empire, they're kind of seen as grandfathered in. But Christians, they're always on the fringe for quite some time. Yeah, once we get to the Decian persecution, yeah, the Jews are not persecuted, Christians are. But this time they're persecuted together. Okay, so there's one fellow who's here, and I mentioned him quite some time. So this is Dunham, which you won't really recognize as a name, but this is modern day Lyon in France. Now, the fellow who's bishop there is Irenaeus. So Irenaeus of Lyon. He was the guy who's writing against Marcion, against Valentinus in the 2nd century, close to the 2nd century. So when you had those massive heretics going around, Irenaeus was the one who wrote his big book against heretics. And it was very, very lengthy. He was very, very thorough. And that was one of the most popular books in Christianity because it was dealing with some of the major problems in the second half of the 2nd century. So Irenaeus in London, we don't know absolutely for sure, but the tradition is that he was actually a victim of the persecutions. So this was 202, 203. Those were the major waves. Like this legislation still had implications for the next 2 decades, but the worst periods would be 202, 203. So the tradition is that Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, who is one of the most famous Christian writers of this period, is actually swept under the wave of this persecution in Lyon. Now, the other famous apologist is Tertullian, and he's based in Carthage. Now, he isn't killed, which is fairly surprising, really, because he was also a very famous writer of his day. He even wouldn't really be protected by the Christians because he had converted to Montanism, a different type of heresy. So it would be a more charismatic heresy where people just start saying, I have this vision, I have this prophecy from God, and Jesus is going to come back, not to Jerusalem, but he's going to come back here in Asia Minor and bring about the end of the world real soon. So it's kind of surprising that Tertullian, who didn't really have protection from Christianity because he had alienated himself going to a heresy, he wasn't persecuted here. But there is a famous case of two women and some men, but the women typically get the top billing. So they're actually captured in 202 and they're executed 203. I'll get to that in a moment. Oh boy, can I? Perpetua and Felicitas. Perpetua and Felicitas. So these were two women martyred in Carthage. There's also a few men who were there alongside them. But this is an extremely famous case because it's one of the few martyrdoms that was written out as a history and widely circulated. So there was the martyrdom of Polycarp, that was in 155, and Polycarp's martyrdom, that work was spread all over the place. So similarly, this was there was a document written about this, and it went all over the place. And since it came from Carthage, people presume that Tertullian wrote it, but we have no idea. So what's going on here? So you have a whole bunch of Christians not worshiping Sol Invictus, the unconquerable sun, and they get arrested. And the idea is, well, you're going to execute them. But the complication is, Perpetua, well, she's a woman, and Felicitas is pregnant. So what do you do with this in addition to the men? Men, oh yeah, sure, just execute them right away. But according to Roman law, you cannot execute a pregnant woman. You have to wait until she gives birth, and then we can execute her. Because they don't want to be culpable for that child's death. My, how things have changed today, where we're just supporting everything. But yeah, the Romans were actually very protective of unborn children. So Felicitas was pregnant, and they're going to execute the Perpetua, three other men. And Felicitas would have to wait for her turn. And she's like, no, I don't want to wait. I actually want to be executed. I don't want to be martyred away from them. And that's also kind of the weird thing with Christian martyrdoms for the next few centuries is there are a lot of Christians who actually wanted to die for the Lord. Because they're kind of assuming this is how you get straightway into heaven. Like this is a good work that you do so that you're in good with God. Felicitas, that wasn't quite her motivation. It seemed like her motivation was more because of solidarity with her brothers and her sister. But according to the document that we have, she gave birth somewhat prematurely, so in 8 months instead of 9, so that she could be executed on time with the other people. Then she was able to give her child to a Christian woman, so child could be raised in a Christian household. But yeah, they were let out. So with the 3 men, they're executed separately. The idea was that you would be put into an arena and be killed by wild beasts. So if you're thinking lions, possibly not. The document that I was reading was because I didn't actually read the entire original document, I was reading the summary of it. There was a leopard and there was a wild cow, but we don't have word of lions exactly. So you just have a whole bunch of wild animals, you throw them into a ring, and then you throw some people in there and see what happens. And that's an execution. Romans. So with the three men, they were thrown into the arena, and some wild animals there that you kill the two guys, and the last one, I believe his name was Secundus. And with Secundus, you also get kind of the Roman naming convention. What does Secundus mean? The second. What does Septimius mean? The seventh. After a certain point in time, sometimes Romans just name their kids after numbers. And Primus, Secundus, Tertius, Quadranius, Quintus, Sextus, Septimius, Octavian, Nonius, Decimus.
Should be not Adrian, that's the seventh, Octavian was eighth, so it should be the ninth now.
Anyway, so Secundus was in there, and no animal would hurt him apparently for some time until he predicted that he would be killed by a leopard, and then he was killed by a leopard. Perpetua and Felicitas, then they went into the arena after that, and I believe it was a wild cow that killed Felicitas. I can't remember what exactly killed Perpetua, but it was one of the famous accounts of people actually standing up until the point of death. Yeah, and this is actually supposed to be in honor of the Lord too, because yeah, you're going in the faith unto death. So if you look, say, to, I'll just go for simplicity's sake, to Philippians chapter 2. This is the one where my mind goes, not necessarily where the martyrs would go. But Paul in Philippians, he's trying to caution the Philippians to actually be like Christ, to have the same mindset as Christ. And that's actually forming the entirety of the letter, is this is how you should act in the faith. And it's not just for you, but even to the point of sacrifice for others, this is what you're supposed to do. So Philippians 2, beginning of verse 5, Paul says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. And then he kind of continues here saying, therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. So what Paul is doing, and this is one of the hymns to Christ, or what's called a hymn to Christ. So Paul might have actually pulled this from an ancient liturgy. Is Paul is saying Jesus didn't consider equality with God something to be grabbed by human beings, so he came down here to actually give us this. But in the process, he actually became a servant to God and to men, and was obedient even to the point of death on the cross, to God and to men. So when people heard this, and when they would hear Paul also say, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, your people would think, okay, well then I need to be obedient unto death. And that is true for us. It is. It's hard, but it's true. Lots of questions.
I guess I go a little bit modern age,
Yes.
you know, when you think of people that have been taken captive and been forced to read things. nowadays we kind of all know that it's not their true statements. So is that denying God? When everybody knows they're being forced to say these words, they're not actually.
Forced to say which words?
Well,
Right.
when you think of the captives that have been taken.
Yeah.
Not so much in ancient history, but currently when they're forced to read various statements about.
So kind of forced to recant their faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Nowadays we all know it's forced. We all know that it's not actually them recanting. Is that considered recanting?
Okay. This is actually going to become one of the main points of contention in the next major heresy in the 250s. And it is going to be like one of the, that persecution may take one or two classes just on its own, just because there's so much that happened during it, or rather as a result from it. And if I'm able to be anachronistic and take what's coming from there and put it into this one, the decision was, if you verbalized recanting your faith, then you would actually recant it. So you were officially outside of the faith if you would say sacrifice to Sol Invictus, or if you would have a public statement like I reject Christianity or I follow this other God. That would actually be considered a violation of the faith, and you would actually need to come back to the faith. And I'll get into like how you actually do that when we get to that persecution, the Decian persecution, and all this fallout from that. But the idea was you couldn't just be brought back to the faith; you basically had to be reconverted. So it was not as simple as saying, "Yeah, I was lying." It's like, no, you have to do something in order to be considered a Christian again. Yeah.
I guess I just looking at the map too just makes me think also of German and Hitler and the number of people that professed against God in order to save other people. And they didn't, it wasn't that they were truly professing that, it was part of what they were doing to save others.
Yeah. And I think that we make a major distinction between that. In part, I think it's because we tend to divide the outer life and the inner life more now, where you have your own inner thought world and that you can actually believe things that you don't necessarily act. And in order to get to the core of a person, you need to go beyond just the mannerisms and everything else. You have to go way in deep. However, that was not like before the years of psychoanalysis. So before the mid 1800s, you just don't really have something like that. Well, you sort of do in some of the philosophers, where they're arguing for, say, like the only thing that you know to be absolutely real is what you have inside, and then you're questioning maybe the material universe outside of you. But generally, there's considered if you're thinking or feeling something, then that's going to work itself out. Also, if you're working something out, then that's what you're thinking or feeling, and it has to be genuine to some extent. So even lying, like yes, you could lie, but the misrepresentation means that was what was at your core. It was what you were thinking opposite. You wouldn't necessarily have somebody going, "I'm just doing this to save other people," because if you're verbalizing, if you're bringing it outside of yourself, then you're actually trying to constitute that as reality or true confession. So yeah, it's not as simple as a lie. Especially when you have something as important as salvation on the line, if you will. And I would say that that even muddies the waters today. Like if you have today, for example, Christians who are captured in one of the Muslim countries in Africa, and this stuff has actually happened, and they just kidnap them, and then they like point guns to their heads, or they put swords to their throats and say, you have to recant your faith, and they put this on videotape so that they can send this around to other Christians in the area so they can see that, yes, these people have recanted. Even then, it's very difficult, because if you're actually saying, I want to save my own skin rather than confess God, like, what is actually going on with your faith? For us, though, I think we, today at least, be more open to saying, we can't read the heart, therefore we don't properly know. But at this point in time in history, they're not necessarily open to that sort of thing. And that could just be because of the overarching culture or ideas at the time, or it could be because everybody else was going through it. So you have people like Perpetua and Felicitas who are like, we're going to die for the faith. You have other Christians who are suffering all sorts of persecution, and they still haven't done it, and then they just survive through everything. And then you have people who say, I'm not a Christian anymore, so that they can not be persecuted, and then after persecution's over, they go, yeah, I was a Christian the whole time. Well, now you're facing people who have lost relatives and friends and everything else. They're dead. You've gone through a whole bunch of turmoil. You may not want to feel like that person is justified in saying, like, yeah, I was lying the whole time. And I think that might have been one of the motivations. I don't know.
That carries on to this day.
Yeah.
When I think about the end of World War II and the denazification program came in, and a lot of people, oh yeah, I was always against it. No, you were not. You know?
Yeah.
But I think back in my own Anglo-Saxon Charlemagne in 800 and whatever, 43, I think. He fought the Saxons all the time, the Germans, and they captured a whole lot. 4,000. They gave the choice: you're a Christian or the head comes off. 4,000 people were decapitated. I mean, there are ways of conversion, you know, but this is not the one I like.
Yeah. Yeah, forced conversions have never really are never really gone well, and for any religion whatsoever.
Well, it worked the other way too. Like when I look at the map of Spain, the Spanish oil couple evicted the Jews. They told them, if you want to stay here, you're going to be Christian. If you want to stay Jewish, you go to Africa. Okay, that's where they went. But like you say, a forced conversion, does it mean much?
It really depends on the individuals, but oftentimes no. Because if we're jumping in, like you jump to Charlemagne, actually I could also go to Charlemagne. Let's go to Charlemagne. So around the turn of the 9th century, he's been warring against the Saxons for quite some time. This has always been a problem area for anybody representing the empire. Charlemagne himself represented the Holy Road area. One of the things that he eventually did after going through basically what you were describing, where you have a whole bunch of people captured, say, be Christian or die, they usually die, or they nominally say, yeah, we're going to be Christian, and then they immediately turn back to paganism and start warring against them again. The only thing that actually worked was when they captured one of the leaders, and he was not only a political leader but a religious leader, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. I keep wanting to say Wotan, but I don't think that's quite correct. But when he was captured, Charlemagne or I don't know if it was Charlemagne himself, but he basically received the message: you convert so as to lead an example for everybody else, or we're going to slaughter everyone else. And then he decided to convert, and then after that time, that was when Saxony, or well, not just Saxony, but just the general Germanic area, that was when it actually started to convert, was after this fellow converted. Because they're very much willing to suffer death for their faith. However, once they saw one of their leaders go into the other faith, then they thought, okay, well, this is okay. And that's also more or less what happened with Constantine, but we'll get to that later. But you also have various different types of forced conversions. There was when the Empire Rus, when they were trying to decide on a religion, eventually the leader of the Rus, he decided to pick Christianity because he could still drink, as opposed to Islam where you couldn't. That's actually true. And he led forced conversion of his people by basically using his army to back everybody up into the river and then just baptize them all. They're halfway drowning in the river, and then it's like, see, you're all Christian now. Which is way better than also the conversion of the New World, where some of the Spanish armies, they would round people up, put them into the ocean or the sea, whatever they had handy, and they're like, okay, say the baptismal rite, okay, kill them all, and God will save his own. He knows who his own are. And basically that's the work ex operato by the word worked, where you're just saying, well, they had no idea what was going on. These people who were in the water had no idea what was going on, because they didn't speak the language. But it was done, therefore our consciences are free. They either reject God and going to hell anyways, or they choose God and they're going to hell.
That reminds me when I was living on Earth, the 500th anniversary of Columbus was in 1992. Anyway, my wife to be, she said, well, we don't celebrate that here. We didn't want to be discovered.
Fair enough.
But apart from that, that refers to the following wave of forcible Christianity. So there are many stories that I took Spanish at UVic, and one of three was talking about a cultural thing, and they gave us all these things. The intention was good, but the way it was done was very bad.
Yes.
And the King of Spain issued various directives or orders how to treat the natives nicely. But it took 3 months per ship to get the order, and they didn't follow it, and there was no way of getting these guys to behave differently. But then look what happened. You have a generation or two after the discovery that the Spanish army leaders fought each other. So none of them had a happy ending.
No.
But it's amazing, though. I mean, I'm really overwhelmed by all these events in, let's say, 200-year period in the Roman Empire. The other thing is, like you mentioned, quite often the head honcho converted, and then all his subjects. So
pretty much. Well, and that was, to go kind of off topic again too, that was actually going to be the Jesuits in the 16th century.
Oh, yes.
That was actually their strategy for China, was that they were trying to target converting the Chinese emperor in order to convert the Chinese empire. And that would actually have been a fairly good strategy. And unfortunately, they couldn't get a prolonged audience with the emperor to try and actually convert him. And the only way that they could actually get into an audience with him was by demonstrating European technology of the day, with usually more with astronomy. And they never actually succeeded in converting the emperor, but since they were still there, they could still convert quite a decent amount of people anyways. Like they didn't stay quiet and nobody converted, but they still, yeah, they couldn't quite get the emperor.
It was a good attempt.
Oh yeah, well I think they made better progress with the Japanese more that way.
Yeah.
Because they actually did convert a couple of lords. That was in the oh no, what's that island called now?
No good.
Not Honshu. I want to say Nagasaki, but that's not right. Anyways, the four main islands, the one most to the west. They actually did convert and this was mostly Jesuit. They actually did convert most of the populace on that island, and the local lords there, a lot of them did convert. And even though Japan went through a period of isolationism for like over 200 years, there's still like tons of Christians at the end of that, just because that you anchored it in. Anyways, so we have Septimius Severus, and I just quickly want to go over a couple other things before we break. Cover a little bit more history, and then we'll shift our focus to Alexander for next time. We've been covering some of the political stuff. This is going to go more into the philosophical stuff. So Septimius Severus.
Wouldn't want to have been the chief librarian of the library in Alexandria.
So he died in 211, and he died of natural causes. Natural causes. One of the very few emperors to do so. Very, very few.
Well, all the people before him, they were military, weren't they?
Most of them were military. Most of the emperors before him were military, had some sort of hand in it. Like Octavian Augustus himself, like the first emperor, like I would say, like no, he wasn't military, but he did have a fair bit of military experience because he actually had to leave the army at some point.
Those that only served for a year or so, they were.
Some of them were military, some of them were members of the Praetorian Guard.
Okay, that's it. That's what I mean,
and you had stuff like that going around.
And that's what you had with the sword.
Yeah.
Your head off.
Well, yeah. That was also the big deal in 69 AD with the year of the four emperors, was after Nero died and being the first. You have Galba, and he was a politician. He died. Otho was I can't remember exactly what rank he was, but he was a military man. And that was one of the reasons that he could actually outmaneuver Galba, was that he could have a fair command of military. So he was able to seize Rome. And then the fourth emperor, Vespasian, he was the general, and he outmaneuvered Otho, which is how Otho died. So that was very much decided by military might. Anyway, so Caracalla, he reigned with his father for some time. He took over by himself. Well, actually, no, that's a misnomer. He took over with his brother until he murdered his brother.
Oh wow!
So you also have Geta here. He only reigned in 211. Caracalla, he killed him.
Excuse me, is that the Roman?
Yeah, he was Roman. Yeah, so Septimius Severus, he was Roman. He also came from North Africa, if I remember correctly. So he might have had some other nationality mixed in there, which is true of some of the Romans, anyways. But yes, you have Septimius Severus. he had these two sons, Caracalla, Geta. Caracalla murdered his brother Geta. And Caracalla was one of the first child emperors. So I'm just checking my dates here. So he came to the throne or to sole power when he was 23.
Okay.
But since he had been co-reigning with his father since 198, he was actually about 10 years old when he first started learning the reins. So anyways, yeah, he took over. And he kept some of the persecutions going. It wasn't quite as hard as it was before because he didn't care so much about that. He just wanted his basically military power and favoritism. But yeah, he was murdered by a soldier, and then that soldier became. Then that guy who commanded the soldier became emperor. And he was emperor for a bit over a year. Then he was killed by another guy. Actually, that's kind of a misnomer. He was killed by his own troops and the troops then elected another guy within their ranks to be emperor. And then when that guy was murdered by the Praetorian Guard, so the guards for the emperors, he was murdered by them.
There were quite a few emperors created by the Praetorian Guard.
But then that guy's cousin, he became emperor. He was actually one of the ones who reigned for quite a few years. He was the only other one in this century that reigned for a long time, so he reigned for 13 years. Then he was killed by his troops. And so on and so forth. Basically for the rest of the 3rd century.
But collectively speaking, they didn't concern themselves with persecuting Christians that much.
No, not specifically, no. Because even with Septimius Severus, with his persecution, he was just focusing on worship of his own particular god. Jews and Christians just happened to be the ones who wouldn't worship that god. For a lot of the persecutions, it wasn't so much that people wanted to target Christians per se, but they had fundamental disagreements about believing in just one God. And that was what drove a lot of the persecutions and executions, among other things, was that they would only worship this one God. So it wasn't exactly that they were trying to target Christians, but Christians were basically the only ones who fit the bill for most of this.
Sure, you can have any gods as long as it's mine.
Yeah, more or less.
That's amazing. I mean, in those days, to be a bishop would be a dangerous position.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So, especially when you speak out against the authority.
Yeah. So yeah, when I see lots of people favoring, say, let's go the Pope or the Patriarch, if we're going Eastern Orthodox Patriarchs, and they're living in palaces and they're going along with whatever political agenda is going on at the day, maybe. That isn't necessarily the case with Rome now, but historically Rome kind of went along with whatever political agenda they had. It's not quite the same as this, where you are actually taking your life into your own hands to lead anybody, as a bishop or as even just a generic pastor. And that was also part of the reason why some of the popes in the medieval period would actually take out an entire state, like the Vatican City State. They would bankroll armies because they didn't, because other people were saying, because they were trying to influence them politically, other people politically, in addition to not wanting to be taken over because they're trying to meddle with the politics in all other lands. Because when the King of France, for example, here's the Pope in Rome say, you have to do this, otherwise you're going to hell. The King of France goes, oh yeah, and then he just starts trying to invade. And then you have to have the Roman army trying to defeat him with all. But that's happened several times with France, that's happened with various German emperors, happened with Italian lords. Yeah.
It bothers me when I think about World War II, at least the first 2 or 3 years, which was essentially in Europe, you had Christians on both sides killing each other.
Oh, well,
So
that will be true for quite a few of the wars post
in Europe
post 700s about there. It's a lot of it will be Christians fighting Christians.
And both sides have their pastors saying you're doing it in the name of the Lord.
Yeah,
I know it.
a lot of it.
But anyway.
Anyways, so we'll break here, go upstairs. So,
Interesting stuff.
dear Heavenly Father, we ask you for the spirit of bravery as we go about facing difficulties from day to day because of our faith. We thank you for the examples of all the martyrs in history, those who are willing to proclaim and die for the faith. We ask you, O Lord, to be with us today as we go through a softer form of persecution, one that's more social than political, well, more social and political rather than physical. We ask you, O Lord, to enlighten our hearts, guide us by your word, that we always may proclaim the salvation we hold in you. In the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting.